Marcus Thompson stood perfectly still outside Buckingham Palace, his red uniform crisp and his black bearskin hat casting a shadow over his weathered face. Tourists clicked their cameras and tried to make him smile, but Marcus remained motionless like a statue. He had been a royal guard for 3 years now, and people often assumed this was all he had ever done with his life. The morning sun reflected off the palace windows as Marcus completed his 2-hour shift. His replacement, Guard Williams, approached with the familiar ceremonial march. Without breaking protocol, they executed the changing of the guard routine that had been performed for centuries. Marcus stepped back, saluted, and walked toward the guardhouse. Inside the small building where the guards changed clothes and rested between shifts, the atmosphere was different. Here, the men could talk freely, joke around, and be themselves. Marcus quietly hung up his ceremonial uniform and put on his casual clothes. He was a man of few words, which made some of his fellow guards curious about his background. "Thompson, you coming to the pub tonight?" asked Guard Roberts, a young man who had joined the Royal Guard just 6 months ago. "We're celebrating Williams's birthday." Marcus shook his head politely. "Thanks, but I have other plans." Roberts looked disappointed. "You never come out with us. What do you do in your free time anyway?" "Nothing special," Marcus replied, checking his watch. "Just personal stuff." The truth was, Marcus had plans that evening, but not the kind his colleagues would expect. He was meeting his old military friend, Jake Morrison, at a shooting range in North London. Jake had been pestering him for months to come shooting, claiming it would be good stress relief from the boring palace duty. Marcus drove his old Honda Civic through London traffic, thinking about his past. Before becoming a Royal Guard, he had served in the British Army for 8 years. Most of that time was spent in regular infantry units, but his last 2 years were different. He had been selected for special training that took him to places and situations he could never discuss with anyone. The shooting range was located in an industrial area, tucked between a car repair shop and a storage facility. From the outside, it looked like any other warehouse. Marcus parked his car and walked toward the entrance where a sign read, "Metropolitan Shooting Club, Members Only." Inside, the range was much larger than it appeared from outside. The main area had 20 shooting lanes, each equipped with electronic targets that could be moved to different distances. The walls were lined with soundproofing material, and the air filtration system hummed quietly overhead. Despite the late hour, about 15 people were practicing their shooting skills. Jake Morrison was waiting near the reception desk, grinning widely when he saw Marcus approach. Jake was a tall, muscular man with short blonde hair and friendly blue eyes. He worked as a private security consultant and had known Marcus since their army days, though they had served in different units. "There he is," Jake called out, extending his hand for a firm handshake. "I was starting to think you'd chicken out." "I said I'd be here," Marcus replied simply. Jake led him to the equipment counter, where they signed in and received safety glasses and ear protection. The range officer, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, explained the safety rules and showed them to lane number 12. "What's your experience level?" Sarah asked Marcus. "Some military training," Marcus answered vaguely. Jake laughed. "He's being modest. Marcus was in the army for 8 years. Sarah nodded and set up targets at 25 meters. "We'll start you both with these Glock 17 pistols. Standard 9mm rounds. Take your time and focus on safety first." The range had several other shooters, including a group of young men who seemed to be having a competition among themselves. They were loud and boastful, making comments about their accuracy and mocking anyone who didn't shoot as well as they thought they should. Marcus and Jake put on their safety equipment and approached their lane. Jake went first, firing 10 rounds at his target. His grouping was decent for a recreational shooter. Most of his shots hit within the center rings of the target. "Not bad," Jake said, stepping back. "Your turn, mate." Marcus picked up the Glock and felt its familiar weight in his hands. He had used this exact model many times before, though in very different circumstances. He raised the pistol, aligned the sights, and fired 10 rounds in steady succession. When the electronic target system brought his target forward, Jake's eyes widened. All 10 shots had hit the bullseye, creating a tight cluster that could be covered by a coin. "Bloody hell, Marcus," Jake exclaimed. "That's incredible shooting." The group of young men in the next lane had noticed Marcus's target and were looking over with surprise. One of them, a cocky-looking guy with expensive shooting gear, smirked and made a comment to his friends. "Lucky shots," the man said loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "Probably beginner's luck." Marcus ignored the comment and asked Sarah to move his target back to 50 meters. This time he fired another 10 rounds with the same calm precision. Again, all shots grouped tightly in the center of the target. The young man's smirk faded slightly, but he wasn't ready to give up. 50 meters with a pistol isn't that impressive, he said to his friends, though his voice lacked the confidence it had before. Jake was amazed by his friend's shooting ability. "Marcus, where did you learn to shoot like that? I thought infantry training was more about rifles." "It was mostly rifles," Marcus replied, not elaborating further. Sarah, who had been observing, approached them with interest. "Would you like to try some longer distance shooting? We have a rifle range upstairs that goes out to 300 meters. The young man from the next lane overheard and laughed. "300 meters? That's real shooting. Let's see how your friend does with a proper challenge." Marcus looked at Jake, who nodded eagerly. "Come on, let's show these guys what real soldiers can do." They followed Sarah upstairs to the rifle range, which was much quieter and more serious than the pistol range below. The lighting was better, and the atmosphere felt more professional. Several experienced marksmen were already practicing, their movements methodical and precise. Sarah set them up with standard hunting rifles and targets at 100 meters to start. The group of young men had followed them upstairs, clearly, wanting to see if Marcus could maintain his accuracy with a different weapon at longer range. Marcus felt completely comfortable with the rifle. It reminded him of countless hours spent in training, though those targets had been very different from the paper ones he was shooting now. He fired 5 rounds, and once again, his grouping was exceptionally tight. "Move it back to 200 meters, Marcus said quietly. The young men exchanged glances. 200 meters was serious distance shooting, requiring real skill and understanding of ballistics, wind conditions, and breathing techniques. As Marcus prepared for his next shots, he noticed that other shooters in the range had stopped their own practice to watch. Word was spreading quickly that someone downstairs was shooting with unusual precision. The silence in the rifle range was broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional click of someone adjusting their scope. Marcus settled into his shooting position, feeling the familiar comfort of the rifle against his shoulder. At 200 meters, the target looked small, but not impossibly so for someone with his background. He controlled his breathing, just as he had been taught years ago in a very different setting. Inhale, exhale halfway, hold, squeeze the trigger gently. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed through the range. Through the spotting scope, Sarah could see the bullet hole appear dead center in the bullseye. "Perfect shot," she announced, her voice showing genuine admiration. Marcus fired 4 more rounds, each one landing within inches of the first. The group of young men had gone quiet, their earlier confidence evaporating as they watched someone demonstrate shooting skills far beyond their own abilities. "How is that even possible?" whispered one of them, a thin guy with expensive tactical gear that looked like it had never seen real use. Jake was beaming with pride for his friend, though he was also puzzled. He had served alongside Marcus in Afghanistan, but they had been in different companies and rarely worked together directly. Jake's role had been convoy security and base defense, while Marcus had often disappeared for days at a time on assignments that were never discussed. "Marcus, mate, you're making the rest of us look like amateurs," Jake said with a grin. "Where exactly did you learn to shoot like this?" Marcus simply shrugged and asked Sarah to move the target back to 300 meters. This was the maximum distance available at the indoor range, and at this point, several other shooters had stopped their own practice entirely to watch. The cocky young man from downstairs, who had introduced himself as Trevor, was no longer smirking. Trevor was the son of a wealthy businessman and had spent thousands of pounds on custom rifles and professional shooting lessons. He considered himself an expert marksman and often dominated the conversations at the shooting club with stories of his accuracy and expensive equipment. 300 meters is where the real men shoot, Trevor said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's see if your luck holds up." An older gentleman named Colonel Hartwell, A retired military officer who was a regular at the range approached their group. He had been watching Marcus's shooting with growing interest and recognition. "Excuse me, young man," Colonel Hartwell said to Marcus. "Your shooting technique is quite exceptional. What unit did you serve with?" Marcus looked uncomfortable with the attention. "Just regular infantry, sir. Nothing special." Colonel Hartwell studied Marcus's face carefully. Something about the young man's demeanor and shooting style seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. "Regular infantry, you say? Which regiment?" "2nd Battalion, Parachute Regiment," Marcus replied truthfully, though he left out significant details about his later assignments. The colonel nodded approvingly. The Parachute Regiment was known for producing excellent soldiers, but even their standard marksmanship training didn't typically result in the level of precision Marcus was demonstrating. At 300 meters, the target was barely visible to the naked eye. Marcus adjusted the rifle scope and took his time studying the conditions. The range's air conditioning created slight air currents that could affect bullet trajectory, and the lighting cast subtle shadows that could make target identification more challenging. Trevor had set up his own custom rifle at the next lane, determined to show that his expensive equipment and training could match whatever Marcus was doing. Trevor's rifle was a precision instrument worth more than most people's cars, with the advanced scope and custom-tuned trigger system. "I'll shoot first," Trevor announced, wanting to set a standard for Marcus to match. "Then we'll see how you do with some real competition." Trevor fired 5 shots at his 300-meter target, taking considerable time between each shot to adjust his position and check his scope settings. When the electronic target system brought his target forward, he had achieved a respectable grouping with 4 shots in the inner rings and 1 slightly outside. "Not bad for these range conditions," Trevor said, clearly pleased with his performance. "The air currents here make precision shooting quite challenging." Several other shooters nodded in agreement. Trevor's shooting was indeed good for a recreational marksman, and his expensive equipment had helped him achieve consistent results. Now all eyes turned to Marcus, who had been watching Trevor's technique with quiet attention. Marcus's rifle was a standard range weapon, not customized or specially tuned like Trevor's expensive setup. Marcus took his shooting position with fluid, practiced movements that spoke of countless hours of training. Colonel Hartwell noticed that Marcus's stance and grip were textbook perfect, but there was something else about his approach that seemed different from standard military training. The first shot rang out, and through the spotting scope, Sarah could see it had hit the bullseye precisely. Marcus cycled the bolt smoothly and fired again without changing his position. The second shot landed within millimeters of the first. Jake was recording with his phone, amazed by his friend's consistency. "This is unbelievable," he muttered to himself. Marcus fired his 3rd, 4th, and 5th shots in steady succession, each one controlled and deliberate. When the target came forward, the entire group gathered around to examine the results. All 5 shots had hit within a circle smaller than a 10-pence coin. The grouping was so tight that some of the bullet holes were overlapping. It was the kind of precision that most recreational shooters could only dream of achieving. Trevor stared at the target in disbelief. His expensive equipment and years of practice had been completely outclassed by someone using basic range gear. "That's impossible," Trevor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nobody shoots groups that tight at 300 meters with a standard rifle." Colonel Hartwell examined the target closely, his experienced eye taking in every detail. He had seen shooting like this before, but only in very specific circumstances involving very specialized training. "Young man," the colonel said to Marcus, "I've been around military marksmanship for 40 years. This level of precision suggests training far beyond standard infantry qualification." Marcus remained silent, clearly uncomfortable with the growing attention and questions about his background. Sarah, who had been running shooting ranges for 15 years, had never seen anything like Marcus's performance. "In all my time here, I've only seen one other person shoot groups this tight at maximum range." "Who was that?" Jake asked, fascinated by the mystery surrounding his friend's abilities. "A gentleman who came in about 2 years ago," Sarah replied. "Said he was retired Special Forces. He could put 5 shots through the same hole at 200 meters, but even he wasn't quite this consistent at 300. The mention of Special Forces caused Trevor to look at Marcus with new understanding, and a growing sense of embarrassment about his earlier mocking comments. Marcus began cleaning the rifle, clearly ready to end the shooting session. He had accomplished what Jake wanted, a relaxing evening at the range. But the attention was making him uncomfortable. "We should probably head out," Marcus said to Jake. "Early shift tomorrow." But Colonel Hartwell wasn't ready to let the conversation end. There was something about Marcus that reminded him of a briefing he had attended several years ago about a classified unit that produced marksmen with almost legendary abilities. "Before you go," the colonel said, "would you mind if I asked about your service record? Your shooting suggests specialized training that I'm quite familiar with from my time in the Ministry of Defense." Marcus looked directly at the colonel for the first time, and the older man saw something in his eyes that confirmed his growing suspicions about the young Royal Guard's true background. Marcus met Colonel Hartwell's steady gaze for a long moment before looking away. The older man's eyes held recognition and understanding that made Marcus deeply uncomfortable. Too many questions were being asked, and too much attention was being focused on abilities he preferred to keep hidden. "I appreciate your interest, Colonel, but I really do need to get going," Marcus said politely but firmly. Colonel Hartwell nodded slowly, understanding that he was being politely dismissed. However, his curiosity was far from satisfied. In his 40 years of military service, including 10 years working with classified special operations units, he had encountered only a handful of marksmen capable of the precision he had just witnessed. Jake noticed the tension between Marcus and the colonel, but didn't understand its source. To him, Marcus was just a fellow veteran who happened to be an exceptional shot. Jake had no idea that his friend's shooting ability suggested training that went far beyond anything taught to regular infantry soldiers. Trevor was still staring at Marcus's target, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. He had spent years and thousands of pounds developing what he thought were expert marksmanship skills, only to be completely outclassed by someone using basic equipment. "Wait," Trevor said as Marcus prepared to leave. "I need to know how you did that. I've been shooting for 8 years and I've never seen anything like what you just did." Marcus paused in cleaning his rifle. Part of him felt sorry for Trevor, whose cockiness had been replaced by genuine humility and curiosity. "Practice," Marcus said simply. "Lots of practice, but what kind of practice?" Trevor pressed. "I practice every week. I've taken courses from Olympic coaches. My equipment is worth more than most cars. How are you so much better with a basic rifle?" Sarah had been listening to the conversation while organizing the shooting equipment. She had seen countless recreational shooters come through her range, and she recognized the frustration in Trevor's voice. Many skilled amateurs reached a plateau in their abilities and couldn't understand why they couldn't progress further. "Sometimes it's not about the equipment," Sarah offered gently. "Some people have natural talent and some have training that goes beyond what most civilians ever experience." Marcus finished cleaning his rifle and handed it back to Sarah. "Thank you for the range time." Everything was excellent. As Marcus and Jake walked toward the exit, Colonel Hartwell made a decision. He followed them into the parking lot, where the evening air was cool and traffic noise from the nearby road created background sound that would mask their conversation. "Mr. Thompson," the colonel called out, using Marcus's last name that he had seen on the sign-in sheet. Marcus turned around, resigned to another conversation he didn't want to have. "I served as a liaison officer with the Director Special Forces for several years," Colonel Hartwell said quietly. "I attended briefings about various special operations units and their capabilities. Your shooting tonight reminded me of demonstrations I saw from one particular unit." Jake looked confused. "What unit?" Marcus was with the Paras regular infantry. Colonel Hartwell kept his eyes on Marcus. "The Special Air Service has a selection course that includes advanced marksmanship training. The graduates of that training can achieve remarkable precision under stress conditions." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Colonel Hartwell was getting dangerously close to information that Marcus had spent 3 years trying to keep private. "I don't know what you're suggesting, Colonel," Marcus said carefully, "but I was never with any Special Forces unit." Colonel Hartwell studied Marcus's face in the parking lot lighting. He could see the tension in the young man's posture and the guarded expression that confirmed his suspicions. "Perhaps not officially," the colonel said thoughtfully, "but your shooting technique suggests training that very few people receive. I've seen SAS snipers demonstrate their skills, and your precision tonight was at that level." Jake was now looking at Marcus with new interest. "SAS, Marcus, is that true?" Were you special forces? Marcus shook his head firmly. No, Jake, I was regular infantry just like I told you. 2 tours in Afghanistan with the paras. Then I left the army and joined the Royal Guard. This was technically true, but it omitted crucial details about his last 2 years of military service. Marcus had indeed been selected for special training, but his official record still showed him as a member of the Parachute Regiment. The training he had received and the missions he had undertaken were classified at levels that didn't officially exist. Colonel Hartwell sensed that Marcus was telling a version of the truth, but not the complete truth. However, he also recognized the signs of someone who had been trained to protect classified information, even years after leaving military service. I understand the need for discretion, the colonel said with a slight smile. Some aspects of military service are not meant for casual conversation. Jake was becoming frustrated with the cryptic conversation between Marcus and the colonel. Can someone please explain what's going on? Marcus, you're one of my closest friends, but right now it feels like I don't know you at all. Marcus felt trapped between his friendship with Jake and his commitment to keeping his past private. Jake deserved some explanation, but Marcus couldn't reveal details about training and operations that remained classified. Jake, you know I served with the paras, Marcus said. During my second tour, I received some additional training in marksmanship. It was nothing dramatic, just specialized courses that helped me become a better soldier. This explanation was partially true. Marcus had received additional training, though calling it nothing dramatic was a significant understatement. The training had been intense, dangerous, and had prepared him for missions that pushed the limits of what special operations forces were asked to do. Colonel Hartwell recognized Marcus's careful choice of words and decided to let the matter rest. He could see that the young man was committed to maintaining his privacy, and the colonel respected that dedication to operational security. Well, regardless of your background, the colonel said, your shooting tonight was exceptional. If you ever decide to compete in marksmanship competitions, you would do very well. Marcus smiled politely. Thank you, sir, but I prefer to keep my shooting as a hobby. The 3 men stood in the parking lot for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Jake was trying to reconcile the Marcus he thought he knew with the mysterious figure who had just demonstrated almost superhuman shooting skills. Colonel Hartwell was mentally reviewing classified briefings from his past, trying to place Marcus within the context of special operations units he had worked with. Marcus was hoping that this conversation would end soon, and that his secrets would remain protected. I should get home, Marcus said, ending the silence. Early shift at the palace tomorrow? Jake nodded, though he was clearly not satisfied with the explanations he had received. Same time next week? He asked hopefully. Marcus hesitated. The evening had been enjoyable in some ways, but the attention and questions had made him uncomfortable. He preferred his current life as an anonymous royal guard, standing silently outside Buckingham Palace where nobody asked about his past or his abilities. Maybe, Marcus said non-committally. I'll let you know. As they walked to their cars, Jake couldn't help but press for more information. Marcus, we've been friends since Afghanistan. If there's something about your service that you can't talk about, I understand. But tonight I saw you do things that I didn't know were humanly possible. Marcus stopped walking and turned to face his friend. Jake's expression showed confusion, curiosity, and perhaps a touch of hurt that his friend had hidden such significant abilities from him. Jake, some things about military service are better left in the past, Marcus said gently. What matters is that we're both here. We're both safe and we're both trying to build good lives as civilians. Jake nodded slowly, though his expression showed he wasn't entirely satisfied with this explanation. I just want to understand who my friend really is. Marcus put his hand on Jake's shoulder. I'm the same person I've always been. The shooting tonight doesn't change anything about our friendship. As Marcus drove home through London traffic, he reflected on the evening's events. He had enjoyed the technical challenge of precision shooting, but the questions and attention had reminded him of why he had chosen to leave his military career behind and pursue the anonymous role of a royal guard. 3 days after the shooting range incident, Marcus was standing at his usual post outside Buckingham Palace when he noticed Colonel Hartwell approaching the gates. The older man was wearing a well-tailored suit and carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Marcus maintained his ceremonial stillness, but internally, He felt a familiar tension. Colonel Hartwell spoke briefly with the palace security officer at the main gate, showed his identification, and was escorted into the palace grounds. Marcus wondered if the colonel's visit was coincidental, or if it was somehow related to their encounter at the shooting range. 2 hours later, as Marcus was being relieved by his replacement, Sergeant Major Williams approached him with an unusual expression. Williams was a career soldier who had been with the Royal Guard for 15 years and rarely showed surprise about anything. "Thompson," Williams said quietly, "you're wanted in the commander's office immediately." "Don't change out of your uniform." Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly, though his expression remained neutral. Being summoned to the commander's office was unusual and typically meant either commendation or serious trouble. Given recent events, Marcus suspected it might be the latter. The walk to the administrative building felt longer than usual. Marcus reviewed his recent performance and couldn't think of any mistakes or protocol violations that would warrant a meeting with Commander Davidson. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that Colonel Hartwell's visit was connected to this summons. Commander Davidson's office was located on the second floor of the Georgian building that housed the Royal Guard's administrative functions. The hallway was lined with portraits of previous commanders and photographs of significant ceremonial events. Marcus knocked on the heavy oak door and waited for permission to enter. "Come in," called a voice from inside. Marcus entered the office and was surprised to find Colonel Hartwell seated in one of the leather chairs facing Commander Davidson's desk. Both men looked up as Marcus approached and saluted. "At ease, Thompson," Commander Davidson said. "Please take a seat." Commander Davidson was a tall, stern-looking man in his 50s who had served with distinction in the Irish Guards before taking command of the Royal Guard unit. He was known for his fairness, but also for his no-nonsense approach to military discipline. Marcus sat down in the remaining chair, maintaining perfect posture despite his growing concern about the purpose of this meeting. "Thompson," Commander Davidson began, "Colonel Hartwell has brought some interesting information to my attention regarding your background and capabilities." Marcus glanced at Colonel Hartwell, who was studying him with the same intense curiosity he had shown at the shooting range. "Sir, I'm not sure what information the colonel is referring to," Marcus said carefully. Colonel Hartwell leaned forward in his chair. "Thompson, after our encounter the other evening, I made some discreet inquiries about your military service record. Your official file shows service with the 2nd Battalion, Parachute Regiment, including 2 tours in Afghanistan. However, there are gaps in your deployment timeline that suggest additional training or assignments." Marcus felt trapped. His official records were carefully constructed to hide his special operations background while remaining technically accurate. However, someone with Colonel Hartwell's connections and experience might be able to identify the inconsistencies that pointed to classified activities. "Sir, my service record is complete and accurate," Marcus replied. "I served with the paras as documented." Commander Davidson consulted a folder on his desk. "Thompson, your performance as a Royal Guard has been exemplary. However, Colonel Hartwell believes you may have capabilities that could be valuable for a special assignment." This was not the direction Marcus had expected the conversation to take. He had assumed he was in trouble for somehow revealing classified information, not being offered a special assignment. "What kind of assignment, sir?" Marcus asked cautiously. Colonel Hartwell answered, "There's an upcoming state visit that will require enhanced security measures. The visiting head of state has received credible threats, and standard security protocols may not be sufficient." Commander Davidson continued the explanation. "We've been asked to provide additional security support, specifically marksmen who can provide overwatch during outdoor ceremonies. Your demonstrated shooting abilities suggest you might be suitable for this role." Marcus realized that his exceptional shooting at the range had created an opportunity he hadn't anticipated. However, accepting this assignment would likely lead to more questions about his background and potentially expose information he preferred to keep hidden. "Sir, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm happy with my current duties," Marcus said diplomatically. Colonel Hartwell smiled slightly. "Thompson, I understand your reluctance to take on additional responsibilities. However, this assignment would only last 1 week, and it would provide valuable experience that could benefit your career." Commander Davidson added, "The assignment comes with a temporary promotion to Lance Corporal and additional pay. More importantly, It's a chance to serve your country in a capacity that makes use of your particular talents. Marcus found himself in a difficult position. Refusing the assignment might seem suspicious and could lead to more questions about why someone with his shooting ability wouldn't want to take on sniper duties. However, accepting might expose him to scrutiny that could reveal his classified background. "May I ask who recommended me for this assignment?" Marcus inquired. Colonel Hartwell exchanged a glance with Commander Davidson before responding. "Based on what I observed at the shooting range, I made some inquiries with contacts in the security services. Your name came up in those conversations as someone who might be suitable for this type of work." This statement made Marcus deeply uncomfortable. If Colonel Hartwell had been making inquiries about him with security services, it suggested that his past wasn't as well hidden as he had hoped. "What exactly would my role be?" Marcus asked, resigned to the fact that he might not be able to avoid this assignment. Commander Davidson opened another folder. "The state visit includes a ceremony and horse guards parade and a reception in the palace gardens. You would be positioned on nearby rooftops to provide overwatch security. The assignment requires someone who can make accurate shots at distances up to 400 meters if necessary." 400 meters was well within Marcus's capabilities, but it was also exactly the kind of work he had done during his classified military service. The parallels were uncomfortably close to missions he had undertaken in very different circumstances. "Sir, I should mention that I haven't done this type of work recently," Marcus said, hoping to discourage them from pursuing this assignment. Colonel Hartwell chuckled. "Thompson, shooting skills like yours don't disappear with lack of practice. Besides, you'll have several days of preparation and training before the actual event." Marcus realized that continuing to object might seem more suspicious than accepting the assignment. A skilled marksman would normally be eager for this type of prestigious duty, and his reluctance might prompt more questions about his background. "Very well, sir," Marcus said finally. "I'll accept the assignment." Commander Davidson smiled approvingly. "Excellent. You'll report to Colonel Hartwell tomorrow morning at 0800 hours for briefing and preparation. This assignment is classified, so you're not to discuss it with anyone outside of authorized personnel." The mention of classification made Marcus feel slightly more comfortable. At least the details of his new role wouldn't become common knowledge among his fellow guards. Colonel Hartwell stood up, indicating that the meeting was ending. "Thompson, I think you'll find this assignment both challenging and rewarding. It's an opportunity to serve at the highest levels of national security." As Marcus left the commander's office, he reflected on how quickly his quiet life as an anonymous royal guard was becoming complicated. The shooting range demonstration that was supposed to be a relaxing evening with a friend had somehow led to a special assignment that would put him back into the world of classified operations he thought he had left behind. Walking back to the guardhouse, Marcus wondered if Colonel Hartwell suspected more about his background than he was letting on. The older man's connections and experience suggested he might have access to information about classified military units and their personnel. That evening, Marcus sat in his small London flat, thinking about the next phase of his life. For 3 years, he had enjoyed the simplicity and anonymity of standing guard outside Buckingham Palace. Tomorrow, he would begin preparing for an assignment that would require him to use skills he had hoped never to need again. His phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. "Can't stop thinking about your shooting the other night. When can we go to the range again?" Marcus stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "Might be busy for a while with work stuff. I'll let you know." As he prepared for bed, Marcus realized that his carefully constructed civilian life was beginning to unravel, and he wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a dangerous development that could expose secrets he had sworn to protect. The next morning, Marcus reported to an address in Westminster that Colonel Hartwell had provided. The building was an unremarkable government office that could have housed any number of bureaucratic departments. However, the security measures at the entrance suggested this was not a typical administrative facility. After passing through multiple security checkpoints and identity verifications, Marcus was escorted to a conference room on the 4th floor. Colonel Hartwell was waiting with 2 other individuals, who introduced themselves as Agent Sarah Mitchell from MI5 and Captain James Roberts from the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Firearms Unit. "Thompson, thank you for accepting this assignment," Colonel Hartwell began. "What I'm about to brief you on is classified at the highest levels. The visiting head of state is President Elena Kozlov of Moldavia, and intelligence services have identified credible threats against her life during this state visit. Agent Mitchell opened a laptop and displayed a series of photographs on the wall screen. We have information suggesting that a terrorist cell with ties to Moldavian separatist groups may attempt an assassination during the public ceremonies planned for her visit. Captain Roberts pointed to diagrams of Horsey. Guards parade in the surrounding area. Standard security protocols include police marksmen positioned on nearby buildings, but the threat assessment suggests we need additional coverage from personnel with specialized training. Marcus studied the photographs and diagrams, his tactical mind automatically analyzing sightlines, distances, and potential problem areas. Despite his reluctance to return to this type of work, he found himself professionally interested in the security challenges presented. "What's the specific threat intelligence?" Marcus asked. Agent Mitchell consulted her notes. "Intercepted communications suggest the group has acquired high-powered rifles and has been conducting surveillance of the ceremony locations. They appear to be planning a long-range attack during the outdoor portions of the visit." Colonel Hartwell added, "Your role would be counter-sniper operations. You'll be positioned to identify and neutralize any hostile marksmen who attempt to engage during the ceremonies." The terminology and mission description were painfully familiar to Marcus. During his classified military service, he had conducted similar operations in hostile environments, though the stakes and consequences had been different. "What's the timeline for the visit?" Marcus inquired. "President Kozlov arrives in 4 days," Captain Roberts replied. "That gives us time for reconnaissance, positioning, and final preparations. You'll work closely with our existing security teams to coordinate coverage and communication." Agent Mitchell displayed more detailed maps showing the planned routes and ceremony locations. The highest risk period will be the ceremony at Horse Guards Parade, where President Kozlov will be exposed in an open area for approximately 30 minutes. Marcus studied the maps and identified several buildings that would provide good overwatch positions. His trained eye also spotted potential locations where hostile marksmen might position themselves for attacks on the ceremony. "Have you identified specific buildings where threats might originate?" Marcus asked. Colonel Hartwell smiled approvingly. "Excellent question. We've identified 12 possible locations within effective rifle range of the ceremony area. Most will be secured by police teams, but we need experienced marksmen who can engage targets at extended ranges if necessary." The meeting continued for 2 hours, covering detailed security plans, communication protocols, and rules of engagement. Marcus found himself slipping back into the tactical mindset that had defined his classified military service, despite his efforts to maintain emotional distance from the assignment. After the briefing, Colonel Hartwell asked Marcus to remain behind for a private conversation. "Thompson, I want to be direct with you," the colonel began once they were alone. "Your shooting ability at the range was exceptional, but this assignment requires more than marksmanship skills. It requires tactical thinking, stress management, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions under pressure." Marcus met the colonel's gaze steadily. "I understand the requirements, sir." "Do you?" Colonel Hartwell asked pointedly. "Because counter-sniper operations are among the most challenging assignments in security work. The margin for error is 0, and the consequences of failure can be catastrophic." Marcus realized that Colonel Hartwell was testing him, trying to determine if he had the mental preparation for this type of mission. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I wouldn't have accepted this assignment if I didn't believe I could handle the responsibilities." Colonel Hartwell studied Marcus's expression for a long moment. "Thompson, your official military record shows conventional infantry service, but your capabilities suggest training that goes far beyond standard military preparation. I'm not asking you to reveal classified information, but I need to know that you're prepared for what this assignment might require." This was the conversation Marcus had been dreading. Colonel Hartwell was clearly suspicious about his background and was pushing for information that Marcus couldn't provide without violating security oaths that remained binding years after his military discharge. "Sir, my training prepared me for challenging assignments," Marcus said carefully. "I believe I can fulfill the requirements of this mission." Colonel Hartwell nodded slowly. "Very well. Tomorrow you'll begin reconnaissance of the ceremony locations and coordination with the security teams. You'll be working with some of the most experienced security professionals in the country. The next morning, Marcus found himself on the roof of a government building overlooking Horse Guards parade. Working with Captain Roberts to identify optimal positions for counter-sniper operations, the view from the rooftop provided excellent coverage of the ceremony area, but also revealed the complexity of securing such a large open space. From this position, you'll have clear sight lines to most of the potential threat locations, Captain Roberts explained, pointing to buildings across the parade ground. The maximum engagement distance would be about 350 meters. Marcus examined the area through binoculars, noting wind patterns, lighting conditions, and potential obstacles that could affect accuracy. His tactical training automatically cataloged information that would be crucial if he needed to engage a target under stress conditions. "What about communication protocols?" Marcus asked. Captain Roberts showed him a sophisticated radio system that would connect him to the central command post and other security elements. "You'll have direct communication with all teams, plus emergency channels to the diplomatic protection officers accompanying President Kozlov." As they continued the reconnaissance, Marcus noticed that Captain Roberts was studying him with the same curiosity that Colonel Hartwell had shown. Word was apparently spreading among the security professionals that the Royal Guard assigned to this mission had unusual capabilities. "Thompson, can I ask about your military background?" Captain Roberts said during a break in their planning. "I've worked with marksmen from various units, and your approach to this assignment seems more sophisticated than typical infantry training would provide." Marcus had prepared for this question. "I received additional marksmanship training during my service. Some soldiers are selected for specialized courses based on their natural abilities." This explanation was technically true, though it vastly understated the nature and intensity of the training Marcus had received. Captain Roberts seemed satisfied with the answer, though Marcus suspected the questions about his background would continue. That afternoon, Marcus participated in a coordination meeting with the entire security team. The room was filled with representatives from MI5, the Metropolitan Police, the Diplomatic Protection Group, and military units. As plans were discussed and assignments confirmed, Marcus realized he was working with some of the most elite security professionals in the United Kingdom. Agent Mitchell presented the latest intelligence updates. "We've identified increased communications activity among the suspected terrorist cell. They appear to be conducting final preparations for an attempt during the Horse Guard ceremony." The tension in the room was palpable as the reality of the threat became clearer. This was not a routine security assignment, but a genuine operation to prevent an assassination attempt against a visiting head of state. Colonel Hartwell addressed the assembled teams. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have 3 days to finalize our preparations. The success of this operation depends on precise coordination and professional execution. Any questions about assignments or protocols?" Marcus raised his hand. "Sir, what are the rules of engagement if a hostile marksman is identified?" The question brought complete silence to the room. Everyone understood that Marcus was asking about the circumstances under which he would be authorized to use lethal force. Agent Mitchell answered carefully. "You are authorized to engage any individual who presents an immediate threat to President Kozlov or other protected persons. However, positive identification of hostile intent is required before engagement." The weight of this responsibility settled on Marcus as he realized that his actions during the state visit could literally determine whether the mission succeeded or failed. After 3 years of peaceful guard duty, he was returning to a world where split-second decisions could have international consequences. The morning of President Kozlov's arrival dawned gray and overcast, with light winds that would be favorable for precision shooting if the need arose. Marcus had been awake since 4 a.m., reviewing his position assignments and mentally preparing for what could be the most challenging day of his civilian life. He arrived at the security staging area at 6 a.m., wearing civilian clothes and carrying a hard case containing his assigned rifle. The weapon was a military-grade precision rifle that he had spent the previous day zeroing and familiarizing himself with. It felt uncomfortably familiar in his hands, bringing back memories of missions he preferred to forget. Colonel Hartwell was coordinating final preparations when Marcus checked in. The older man looked tired but alert, and the stress of managing such a complex security operation was evident in his demeanor. "Thompson, you'll be positioned on the roof of the Treasury building," Colonel Hartwell said, handing Marcus a detailed map. That gives you coverage of the northern approach routes and overlapping fields of fire with the police marksman on the Foreign Office building. Marcus studied the position and nodded. The Treasury building was an excellent choice, providing elevated coverage of the ceremony area while offering multiple escape routes if repositioning became necessary. Agent Mitchell approached with the latest intelligence update. We've had radio intercepts suggesting the terrorist cell is moving into position. 3 individuals with suspected weapons were observed in the area around midnight, but we lost surveillance contact. This news sent a ripple of tension through the security teams, knowing that hostile forces were likely already in position, transformed the operation from a precautionary measure to an active threat response, Captain. Roberts briefed the marksman teams on their final assignments. Remember, positive identification is essential before engagement. We cannot afford to mistake security personnel or innocent civilians for hostile targets. Marcus made his way to the Treasury building, where he was escorted to the roof by building security. The position was everything he had hoped for. Excellent visibility, stable shooting platform, and clear communication with the command post. He set up his rifle and conducted final equipment checks while monitoring radio communications from other security elements. The professional chatter reminded him of pre-mission preparations during his military service, though the urban environment and political stakes were very different. At 10 a.m., President Kozlov's motorcade arrived at Buckingham Palace for the official welcome ceremony. Marcus watched through his rifle scope as the diplomatic vehicles moved through the secured area, their routes carefully planned to minimize exposure to potential threats. All Overwatch positions. "This is command," came the voice through his earpiece. "President Kozlov is proceeding to Horse Guards parade for the ceremony. Maintain heightened vigilance." Marcus adjusted his position and began systematic scanning of the buildings and locations identified as potential threat positions. His trained eye moved methodically across windows, rooftops, and other areas where a hostile marksman might establish a firing position. 15 minutes into the ceremony, Marcus spotted movement in a window of an office building approximately 300 meters from the parade ground. Through his rifle scope, he could see the partial outline of what appeared to be a rifle barrel protruding from an open window. "Command, this is Overwatch 3. Marcus spoke calmly into his radio. "I have possible hostile activity in Building 7, 4th floor northwest corner window." The response was immediate. "Overwatch 3. Maintain observation and report any definitive hostile actions." Building 7 was supposed to be secured by Police Team 2. Marcus continued watching the window while other security elements attempted to contact the police team assigned to Building 7. Something was wrong. Either the police team had missed this location, or the hostile marksman had managed to penetrate their security perimeter. Through his scope, Marcus could now clearly see a rifle being positioned in the window. The weapon appeared to be aimed toward the ceremony area, where President Kozlov was participating in a military review with British officials. "Command, this is Overwatch 3, Marcus reported with controlled urgency. "I have positive identification of a hostile weapon in Building 7. The individual is aiming toward the ceremony area." "Overwatch 3, you are authorized to engage if you assess immediate threat to protected persons," came the reply from Agent Mitchell. Marcus felt the familiar calm that had characterized his most dangerous missions during military service. Time seemed to slow as he calculated distance, wind conditions, and the precise shot placement needed to neutralize the threat without endangering innocent people in the building. Through his scope, he could see the hostile marksman making final adjustments to his rifle. The man was clearly preparing to fire, and President Kozlov was directly in his line of sight. Marcus controlled his breathing, centered his crosshairs on the target, and squeezed the trigger with the same precision he had demonstrated at the shooting range. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that was barely audible over the ceremony music and crowd noise. Through his scope, Marcus saw the hostile marksman collapse backward from the window. The threat had been neutralized, but Marcus remained focused on the building to ensure there were no additional attackers. "Command, this is Overwatch 3, Marcus reported. "Threat neutralized. Target is down." The radio exploded with activity as security teams coordinated response to the building and ensured that President Kozlov was moved to a more secure location. The ceremony continued with most attendees unaware that an assassination attempt had just been prevented. Captain Roberts's voice came through Marcus's earpiece. Outstanding shooting, Overwatch 3. Police teams are entering Building 7 to secure the scene. 20 minutes later, Agent Mitchell provided confirmation through the radio network. All teams, be advised that a hostile marksman has been neutralized in Building 7. The individual was armed with a high-powered rifle and was in position to engage the ceremony. Excellent work by Overwatch 3. Marcus remained in position for another hour, continuing to provide security coverage as President Kozlov completed her ceremonial activities and returned to the palace. Only when the all-clear was given did he begin to pack up his equipment and prepare to leave his position. Colonel Hartwell was waiting when Marcus returned to the staging area. The older man's expression showed relief, professional satisfaction, and something else that Marcus couldn't quite identify. "Thompson, that was exceptional work," Colonel Hartwell said as they walked to a private briefing room. "Your quick identification and precise engagement prevented what could have been a successful assassination." Marcus nodded but didn't feel like celebrating. Taking a life, even in defense of others, was something that never became easier, regardless of the circumstances or justification. "Sir, I'm glad the mission was successful," Marcus replied simply. Colonel Hartwell studied Marcus's subdued reaction. "Thompson, I've seen many marksmen handle high-pressure situations, but your performance today was at the level of the most elite special operations personnel. That kind of capability doesn't come from standard military training." This was the conversation Marcus had been dreading since accepting the assignment. His performance had been too good, too professional, too indicative of training that went far beyond conventional infantry preparation. "Sir, adrenaline and training can help people perform beyond their normal capabilities," Marcus offered weakly. Colonel Hartwell smiled knowingly. "Thompson, I've been around special operations for most of my career. What I witnessed today was the work of someone who has been in situations like this before, someone who has training that prepares them for exactly this type of mission." Marcus realized that his cover as a simple royal guard with exceptional shooting ability was no longer sustainable. Colonel Hartwell had seen enough to know that Marcus's background included experiences that weren't reflected in his official military records. Agent Mitchell entered the briefing room with a preliminary report on the neutralized threat. "The individual you engaged was identified as Alexei Petrov, a known member of the Moldavian separatist group we've been tracking. Excellent work preventing what would have been a successful attack." She paused and looked at Marcus with obvious admiration. "Thompson, your shot was placed with surgical precision. The target was neutralized instantly, with no risk to other occupants of the building. That's the work of a professional sniper." The word professional hung in the air, loaded with implications about Marcus's true background and training. Colonel Hartwell and Agent Mitchell were both experienced, enough to recognize that they were looking at someone whose capabilities went far beyond what his official record suggested. Marcus knew that his carefully constructed civilian identity was crumbling, and that questions about his real background would only intensify after today's operation. 2 days after the successful protection of President Kozlov, Marcus found himself in a secure conference room deep within the Ministry of Defense building. Across from him sat Colonel Hartwell, Agent Mitchell, and a man who had introduced himself only as Director Thompson, no relation, despite the shared surname. The director was a quiet man in his 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail about Marcus's appearance and demeanor. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with classified information in dangerous situations. "Mr. Thompson," the director began, "your performance during the state visit operation was exceptional. However, it has also raised questions about your background that need to be addressed." Marcus had spent the last 2 days preparing for this conversation. He knew that his cover as a simple royal guard was no longer credible, and that these people had the resources to investigate his past in ways that might expose information he was sworn to protect. "Sir, I'm not sure what questions you're referring to," Marcus replied, though he knew exactly what the director meant. Agent Mitchell opened a laptop and displayed a series of documents on the wall screen. "Mr. Thompson, we've conducted a thorough review of your military service record. While your official file shows conventional infantry service with the Parachute Regiment, there are anomalies that suggest additional training and assignments." The documents on the screen showed Marcus's basic service record, But Agent Mitchell was highlighting gaps in deployment timelines and training courses that weren't fully explained in the official paperwork. Colonel Hartwell leaned forward. "Thompson, the precision of your shot during the operation, your tactical awareness, and your stress management under extreme pressure all indicate training that goes far beyond standard military preparation." The director spoke quietly. "Mr. Thompson, we believe you may have served with units whose activities remain classified. We're not asking you to violate security oaths, but we need to understand your true capabilities and background." Marcus felt trapped between his commitment to protecting classified information and the reality that these experienced intelligence professionals had already reached accurate conclusions about his past. "Sir, I served my country faithfully during my military career," Marcus said carefully. "All of my training and assignments were conducted within proper authorization and oversight." The director smiled slightly. "Mr. Thompson, that's not in question. What we're trying to determine is whether your skills and experience might be valuable for other assignments that go beyond standing guard at Buckingham Palace." This was the direction Marcus had feared the conversation would take. These people weren't just curious about his background. They were recruiting him for additional special operations work. Agent Mitchell displayed more documents. "The intelligence services have identified several ongoing threats that require personnel with your particular combination of skills. Your performance during the state visit suggests you might be ideally suited for counterterrorism operations." Marcus shook his head. "I appreciate the confidence, but I left military service specifically to pursue a quieter civilian career. I'm content with my current role as a Royal Guard." Colonel Hartwell looked skeptical. "Thompson, someone with your capabilities doesn't typically choose to stand motionless outside a palace for hours at a time. You must have had reasons for leaving more challenging assignments behind." The question touched on painful memories that Marcus preferred not to discuss. His decision to leave special operations had been driven by experiences that had tested the limits of what he was willing to do in service of his country. "Sir, everyone has personal reasons for the career choices they make," Marcus replied diplomatically. The director consulted his notes. "Mr. Thompson, our research suggests you may have served with the Special Air Service during the final 2 years of your military career. If that's accurate, you would have training and experience that make you one of the most capable operatives in the country." Marcus realized that these people had already uncovered information that came very close to his actual background. Continuing to deny his special operations training was becoming pointless and potentially counterproductive. "Hypothetically speaking," Marcus said carefully, "if someone had received such training, they might also have good reasons for choosing not to continue that type of work." The director nodded understandingly. "We appreciate that special operations can be demanding and that personnel may decide to pursue different paths. However, current threat levels require us to utilize all available resources to protect national security." Agent Mitchell displayed photographs of suspected terrorist cells and intelligence reports about planned attacks. "Mr. Thompson, the threats we're facing require personnel who can operate independently, make critical decisions under pressure, and engage targets with precision when necessary." Marcus studied the intelligence reports and recognized the complexity of the threats being described. Despite his desire to maintain his civilian life, he couldn't ignore the professional interest sparked by the tactical challenges presented. "What specifically are you asking me to consider?" Marcus inquired. Colonel Hartwell answered. "We're proposing that you accept a consultant role with the intelligence services. You would maintain your position as a Royal Guard as cover, but be available for special assignments when your particular skills are needed." The proposal was more reasonable than Marcus had expected. Rather than asking him to return to full-time special operations, they were suggesting a part-time arrangement that would allow him to maintain his civilian identity. "What kind of assignments?" Marcus asked. The director replied. "Counterterrorism operations, protection of high-value targets, and other missions that require someone with your background and capabilities. Most assignments would be domestic, though some international travel might be required," Agent Mitchell added. "The compensation would be substantial, and you would have the satisfaction of knowing you're using your skills to protect innocent people." Marcus found himself genuinely considering the proposal. The state visit operation had reminded him of the satisfaction that came from using his skills for important missions. Despite the emotional costs involved, I would need guarantees about operational security and protection of my civilian identity, Marcus said. Colonel Hartwell smiled. Naturally, your role as a Royal Guard would provide excellent cover for intelligence activities, and we would ensure that your special operations background remains protected. The director stood up, indicating that the formal presentation was complete. Mr. Thompson, we don't need an immediate answer. Take some time to consider our proposal and let us know your decision. As Marcus left the Ministry of Defense building, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that evening at the shooting range. His attempt to enjoy a simple hobby with a friend had somehow led to exposure of his classified background and a recruitment offer from the intelligence services. That evening, Marcus called Jake to arrange another meeting at the shooting range. He felt a need to return to the place where this sequence of events had begun, perhaps to help him decide what direction his life should take next. Jake was delighted to hear from him. Marcus, I was starting to think you were avoiding me after your incredible shooting the other night. Not avoiding you, Marcus replied. Just dealing with some work complications. Can you meet me at the range tomorrow evening? Absolutely. I'm eager to see if you can repeat that amazing performance. As Marcus prepared for bed, he realized that tomorrow's shooting session would be different from the previous one. This time he wouldn't be trying to hide his abilities or avoid questions about his background. The secret was out, and now he had to decide whether to embrace his true identity or continue trying to live as someone he wasn't. The next evening at the shooting range, Marcus found himself more relaxed than he had been in years. He no longer had to pretend to be just a Royal Guard with lucky shooting skills. Jake was amazed once again by Marcus's precision, but this time Marcus felt comfortable discussing his military background in general terms. You really were Special Forces, weren't you? Jake asked as they watched Marcus's latest target show another impossibly tight grouping. Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. Let's just say I had some additional training beyond standard infantry preparation. Jake grinned. I knew there was more to you than standing guard at the palace. So what happens now? Marcus looked at his target, then at his friend who had unknowingly started this entire sequence of events. Now I decide whether to keep standing still like a statue or start moving again. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood at his usual post outside Buckingham Palace, wearing his ceremonial red uniform and maintaining the traditional stillness expected of a royal guard. To tourists and casual observers, he appeared to be exactly what he seemed, a disciplined soldier performing ceremonial duties. However, the small communication device hidden in his ear occasionally carried messages that had nothing to do with guard duty. His new role as a consultant to the intelligence services meant that beneath the familiar red uniform, Marcus Thompson was once again serving his country in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged. The irony wasn't lost on him. By trying to hide his true abilities and live as someone he wasn't, The irony wasn't lost on him. By trying to hide his true abilities and live as someone he wasn't, he had attracted exactly the kind of attention he had been trying to avoid. But perhaps, Marcus reflected, some people weren't meant to stand still and pretend to be ordinary. His phone buzzed with a text message from Jake. Shooting range this weekend? I promise not to be intimidated by your scary skills anymore. Marcus smiled slightly, careful not to break his ceremonial composure, and mentally composed his reply. Definitely. I think I'm finally comfortable with who I really am. The transformation was complete. The silent royal guard who had been mocked at a shooting range had revealed not just his exceptional marksmanship skills, but his true identity as one of the country's most capable special operations veterans. And now, instead of hiding from his past, he was using it to serve his country in new and challenging ways.